Welcome to the SPRT Therapy Podcast, where top doctors, trainers, and athletes share their secrets to moving better, recovering better, and performing better.
I'm going to tell you right now, if it wasn't for Tim Brown, I would have never walked again or surfed.
Please join hosts Dr. Tim Brown and Dr. John Pecora for today's conversation.
Hey, I'm Dr. Tim Brown.
And I'm Taylor Knox.
And I'm Dr. John Pecora. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the SPRT Therapy Podcast. We're so excited to have former professional surfer and all-around legend Taylor Knox on to join us. Taylor is going to be speaking at the upcoming SPRT Therapy US Open Surf Movement Masterclass in August 1st and 2nd in Newport Beach. If you're interested in attending, please visit sprttherapy.com to register. If you have any questions, check out our Instagram at SPRT Therapy. But just really excited to have you coming to speak, sharing your knowledge and your wisdom over years and years of competitive surfing and being a high-level athlete. And maybe a great place to start would just be, how did you guys meet, you and Tim, back in the day, and then maybe kind of discuss the evolution and the progression of that relationship over the years.
I felt privileged to be like there when a star was born. When I was coming through the NSSA days, I was, at the end, I was doing pretty well. It looked like I was going to have a chance at being a professional, or at least trying. And we had I think it was definitely a contest in Huntington. And there was this back little area where this guy was doing stuff to people that I didn't really understand what he was doing and what he was working on. But I had the luckily privileged to be at that contest and being able to go up and work with him and ask him, hey, can you adjust me? Or, I got this sort. I forgot what was wrong with me because, so long ago. But I asked him if he could help me, just, loosen me up, basically. And after being treated and, being where we were in our days of surfing, like to have someone that was there on the beach to treat you felt like you were famous. Like, oh my God, we have a trainer here. This is like getting big time. It was like Tim under an umbrella.
Yeah, exactly.
In our minds, it was a big deal. We felt like more of a professional athlete because we knew like football players and stuff had that, and like surfing never had that. We never had someone that came into our sport either with that was already a surfer that understood our injuries. So that was another thing, like a really commonality that when I met Tim, I was like, oh man, this guy, I'm going to be friends with him for decades. I can feel it.
Who'd have thunk, right?
Yeah. Who would have thought?
And you have been, how old were you at that point? And was this a US Open or what? Would you remember what contest?
It was one of the early U.S. Opens, maybe. I'm not sure which one. It could even have been in like an NSSA Nationals or something like that. Because Tim would only kind of be at the big events, He wouldn't be at our every weekend NSSAs or anything. But he showed up for the big stuff, and it was an interesting, being at 15, having like 3 fused vertebrae and 9 pieces of metal put in my back. My L3, L4, and L5 are fused together. I knew I was working with a different set of tools than anyone else on the beach. So I needed someone that thought differently. And I would go to doctors, and I played around with a couple chiropractors in my early teens. So they were kind of goofy and it was kind of violent. And, like it would just whip my neck around where I'm not like sure if this is good or bad for me. Like I heard cracking, but it could have been my neck snapping. But the way Tim approached the body was so different. His angles were different, his touch was different. And so I gravitated towards a functionality of like, look, I've got 3 fused vertebrae, Tim, help me here. I want to like be a pro surfer. What do I got to do? Okay, well, let's work on your hamstrings. Let's get your glutes going. Like it was all this stuff, because I was just a kid and I was getting my advice from like reading short excerpts in like Surfer magazine articles of Tom Carroll or maybe Tom Kern, like 1 or 2 guys trained. And they'd be like, oh, we're doing this in the gym. And I'd be like, oh, really? Wow, maybe I should run sand dunes. Tom Kern's doing it. Like I would just take any little bit of information I could get It was like a desert out there.
Well, you were definitely an outlier. I remember just by the questions that you asked, I knew you had been through something extraordinary relative to what most athletes had been to. I mean, you had a spinal fusion at like 14 or 15 years old, and should by no means, based on my education and short experience at that time, be able to do what you were doing. So I was just as fascinated with you as you were with me, and my approach. And I knew I didn't want to work on the fusion, but I knew that if we could correct some things that were above it and below it, that we might have a shot at getting you as mobile as you need to be to do the things that you were doing. And believe me, it was so remarkable to see an athlete with your with your history of surgery, be able to do the stuff you're doing. I was just blown away. So it was a mutual fascination club for sure.
Two weirdos got together under the umbrella. We can work together.
That's probably a better description.
That's how genius usually happens, right? It's, would you mind talking just for a second about how that came about? You don't have to go into detail if not, but how at that age, were you in a place where you needed, fusion in your low back?
I had spondylolisthesis, grade 4. They said I was born with it. But then I had I was skating a lot in drainage ditches, skateboarding. And I just remember I fell on my ass really hard one day. And then I had this shooting pain going down my left leg. I mean, I'm 15. I don't know anything. I'm like, oh, what is this pain? Whatever, it's nothing. I'm sure it'll just go away. This just didn't go away. And it was really irritating. So, one day I went to wake up for school and I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. And I was like, oh my God, this is bad. So I called my mom and she helped me out of my bed. And we went to the chiropractor, and this was a bad idea. They shouldn't have done it, but they adjusted me.
Wow.
And that made matters worse, right?
Wow, of course.
So then I'm like, oh God, this is real bad now. So when we went to the doctor, I was still whatever, pop the bone back in, let's go, And then he looked at my x-ray and he, the vertebrae are stacked on top of each other. And my L5 was here. So it was basically it was cutting my sciatic. And the doctor was like, we're going to do emergency surgery right away. And I was like, no. I got nationals in a month. Can't we just wait? And he's like, no, we can't wait. You should be paralyzed from the waist down right now as I see you. But for whatever reason, you're not. So let's get you in there. And that was hard, as a 15-year-old to be. And then he told me I would never surf again. So I was just it was getting punched twice. So
yeah, especially with the level of surgeries or the level of trauma that was involved in those types of surgeries back then, I certainly on paper would have agreed with him. It was, a mess down there, and to have that spondylolisthesis, where your vertebrae is literally tipping off the edge of the cliff there on the vertebra below. I mean, how devastating for a 15-year-old. It's probably better that you didn't really understand what the heck was going on.
Yeah, probably. My mom did keep some things from me, and I understand why now. She goes, if I told you the truth, we know you wouldn't have shown up to the hospital.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, thank God that you did. And then talk about the progression from there. So you have the surgery at that age. You're already a highly skilled, athlete. And knowing what we know as athletes, there's always challenges, there's speed bumps, there's hurdles that we have to overcome. That's a really tough one at that age. Talk us through, then after the surgery and then the progressive, kind of progression from there.
After the surgery, it really led for the first 3 months. They told me I was going to be surfing at 3 months. They lied. And so when I got to the 3-month mark, I was like, okay, he said, so they were like, oh, you're going to have to wait another 3 months. And then that kind of sent me into a depression a little bit. I was in a back brace from my chest down to my knee, and I was straight, so I couldn't move. And I had to live in it 24 hours a day. I couldn't take it off, so I had to sleep in it. And so that was pretty heavy. to accept. And so I went through this depression part of where I got really low, and a friend of mine gave me a really simple book to think positive, and I read it. And for whatever reason, I absorbed it, and he basically threw it at me in the garage one day, not even knowing what the impact of this book would be. Right. And
Wow.
that we still laugh about that because he doesn't even remember giving it to me. But
Wow.
I went into this depression. I was able to pull myself out. And this is early days where in my head, I'm like, I have no money. My parents, they provided great food for me and all that, but like, I don't know how to heal myself. So I thought, this book talked about visualizing my bones healing together. So I would literally visualize my bones mending together. And then the only other supplement I could think of for bones was milk. That's what I was told my whole life. Milk is good for bones. So I was drinking like a gallon of milk a day because I wanted my bones to heal. And that was it. I got back to surfing. I was obviously stiff. I was actually, my chest being stuck like this for many months. I'm still working on that to this day. And so I was like, God, I'm so tight in my backside of my body. I just started doing a lot of hamstring work. Without really knowing much. I would just spend hours and hours stretching out. And then I got into yoga a little bit. And that's right about when I met with Tim. And that's when the whole thing exploded into different areas of yoga and weights and bands and Swiss balls. And then it was just like, it went like this, like I got in there and then it just opened up into this whole, and it's still opening up to right now.
Yeah, that was serendipitous. I remember you talking about yoga really early on, and the only other person that I had worked with that had yoga background that was involved in surfing was Jerry. So I knew you were on a good track, following in his steed. And I was just so impressed with your discipline, and you're like, give me anything. I'm starving. I will eat anything that you give me. And for me, that was super motivating for me to get my shit together to make sure that I had enough food and sustenance for you and people like you that I would meet further on down the road that were just frothing to get better and were ready to fully participate in their own rehabilitation. Most people, come to the doctor, they say, fix me, I'm here, I'm on the table, get me right. And that's not the way it works, certainly as you know, and have experienced, and certainly, John, through your career, you've experienced. If the athlete doesn't participate in their care, your outcome's going to be very limited, and it won't be stable ever, because you have to change the reason for that person being there, the core reason behind that, and and certainly in your case, Taylor, it was stability. Having to be able to stabilize your core as you did all the dynamic movements that are necessary in surfing. And, so I thank you just as much as you thank me for our relationship, and in that it was certainly symbiotic and synergistic.
That's why we're still working together, buddy.
There we go.
And well said, TB. I think it's such an important point. The intimate involvement in the process is the differentiator between whether athletes continue on and become really successful and are able to persevere, or they just they get frustrated. And we wanted this conversation to be a lot longer. We're limited today on time, but the plan is in the future to sit down in person and really crank out maybe a Joe Rogan 3 to 4 hour podcast, just because there's so much to talk about. Taylor, you talk about depression and the challenges as an athlete of going through an injury like that. It's not only the fear and worry and doubt about the future and frustration about what happened and all the thoughts that go through your head. It's the inability to get out and move and do the thing that you love and keep your body moving, which keeps your brain moving, which keeps your psyche and your soul and everything moving. And so, would love to kind of talk more about that at a certain point, because that's obviously really, really important. But then the impact, and this is why we're trying to put this Surf Movement Masterclass together. and just share. It's one of the reasons why you're out there teaching Kelee meditation and working with Mike Rentala on DNS, and why Tim has spent his entire career, out there, based on the fact that he had challenges as an athlete and saw that there was a better way to address, some of these challenges, some of these issues, and just really wants to share that with the world. Same with myself. But, you never know what one word, one statement, one quote, one book, what kind of impact that can have on someone's life, on someone's career. When you're in a dark moment like that, and for someone to throw you a lifeline, to throw you any glimpse, like you said, you're scavenging for quotes, from someone in a magazine. I mean, the information just wasn't readily available. And still now it's almost, there's too much information. You don't know what to use and where to go. And, it's why we're trying to put this together. But, just the impact of what you're doing out there with young athletes, the small gems and gold nuggets of information that sometimes, once again, one quote, one book can completely change your outlook on where you're at and how you're gonna address that and move forward.
Absolutely. Amen.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So then you meet Tim, say that this is NSSAs or it's early US Opens. Kind of walk us through kind of the rest of your career, not only, as a competitive surfer and as an athlete, but then, obviously, even though you found some great methods and some great strategies to help to address, and we always talk about, it would have been nice, no matter what your level of instability or your challenges, had you found that stuff at 10, 11, 12, and been able to create the stability and the control to maybe not be in the place that you're at. But then you are there, and you're going through those challenges. Talk us through, kind of the progression of your career from there.
Okay. So, I meet Tim, I get on tour early 90s, 91 or 2. He's starting to travel with us. The surfers are demanding that these guys be there, right? Because we're beat up and we got stuff going on all the time. That's what people don't see. Like, the most wanted people at the contest are these guys. I can tell you that because I was on that circuit for 20 years, and they were probably trying to hide from us, like, oh, not him again. So we grew as they grew. And then Dr. Warren Kramer, he came on board as a team doctor. We had, we've had some great people around the world that would join up for that country. Tim knows the names of most of these guys, and Eric are one of our favorites in France, Eric, and just guys like that you wouldn't see and aren't involved now. But it was great to grow with them and hear, like, a guy like Eric who would come on during the European, and he would work mainly with, like, Bordeaux's soccer team. So he was looking at the body and injuries with soccer players all the time. But there was some crossovers to some of the surfer stuff too. And his technique and the way he would come out a muscle or a joint would be a little bit different. So as I was growing through the tour in the early days, I started getting into training really. I would go to the gym and use those archaic machines where you're doing leg lifts. And, I was doing that for a few years.
Knotless.
I just didn't know any better. I was just in the gym, and I was the only surfer in there. And, there were no other surfers that would train. Even guys in town, it was just jocks. It was like bodybuilders. And they were looking at me like, what are you doing in here? You're too skinny. But I swear I worked on probably just my legs and no arms at all for like the first 12 years of training. I just didn't want to get bulky up here. And so I just worked on my legs, and that's it. I just thought, my strength, I'm like, surfers a little bit like a pitcher, and they use their power from their legs. So I thought, well, at the time I was hanging out with Trevor Hoffman, one of the all-time great Padres, and we were training together. And man, I've never seen anyone thighs that big, but like I would train with those guys, try and do leg lifts, deadlifts. And then it got the Swiss ball era came in, and then that was cool because it was more body weight, and then I was mixing in the weight with the Swiss ball, and then it brought in cables, and we were doing cable stuff. And so along the way, I would call Tim and I'd be like, dude, what do you think about this? He'd be like, that's goofy. Don't do that. Or, yeah, that's great. There's a lot of credibility in that. And so I would always bounce what I was doing off Tim, and then we'd be on tour together as well. So I'm inspired by seeing guys like John and Mick come through the ranks now, as dedicated as I was back in the day, and they're working with Tim and they're finding and bringing new stuff. So to me, it was just like this. It's still a continual evolution. We just need to, make sure that we got a good team on that tour, working with the best guys, because the best guys are going to show us what's coming for the newer guys and what's going to and how to help the old guys. So
right.
we need the guys on the cutting edge of this sport to be working with these kind of people, because it really helps everyone else. It's not just about them. They share their information. And that's why I love working with like either Eric or Tim or Mike Rintala, because everyone wants to share. We all want to help each other. It's not like, oh, this is my thing and let's keep it secret just for me. Like, I don't like really working with people like that.
Yeah, because we're all learning. We're all at the big university of life here, and we all are on a continuum of learning. And as I mentioned before, I've learned just as much from you as you've learned from me, and I learned from Rintala and Eric, and all those people add to the whole, because there really is no straight answer. It's really oblique, and it's really genetic, and it's really environmental, and it's really unique to the individual, because everybody's background is so different. The downside of all that is we're getting a whole lot of information coming into the mix, and some of it's on point and some of it's like, where did that come from? And so being able to have a filter, and in your case, being able to call people and say, what do you think about this? Does it fit through the filter, or does it stay in the mesh and nothing's coming through because it's not valid? I think it's brilliant to do. And I think that guys like yourself and as you mentioned, Mick and John and those guys are curious, man. They're really curious, and they want to know, especially stuff that others aren't really onto yet. And that motivates it, that lights their fire, keeps the fire going for them, because when they're onto something new, they know that their potential for reaching new heights or preventing injury is blossoming. And that is what keeps me motivated to keep, hanging out with you guys for the last 40 years.
It's such a trickle down effect, right? Okay, so let's say I want to surf with my dad.
Yeah.
And he has a knee problem. And there's something that we found that helped my dad's knee. Now I can still surf with him. So this there's a tree here, and then and with as many surfers as there are in the water these days, I think it's like a good average of like 3 generations now can surf together.
For sure.
You have the 15-year-old, the 45-year-old, and the 65-year-old. Like, everyone's in a different place. The 15-year-old doesn't feel like the 65-year-old, and the 65-year-old doesn't feel like the 15-year-old.
Yeah, no kidding. Those little rats are paddling around me all day. What happened to respect for the old guy?
Respect the 54th than that. Come on.
Well, that's great. Let's add curiosity to the list of key attributes to be in, really high level, competitive, best of the best performer. I think we originally talked about, being an involved participant, in the process as far as rehab or treatment or, just the process of getting better. But that curiosity piece is, obviously a big part of the puzzle. You got to want it. You got to want to be a student of the game. If you really want to be the best of the best, and Tim, you talk about, the story about Kobe, talking about the difference between just being good and being great. I mean, every decision that you make on a daily basis has to be, this is either going to get me better or it's not. And the more decisions that I can make that are going to get me better over a consistent, persistent period of time, obviously is going to get me there. Taylor, you talked about, kind of the evolution of the dynamic requirements of a surfer now, in today's world. Can you talk us through maybe, towards the end of your career, the progression into the fact that you still absolutely rip out there and just, froth, just like any one of those, kids that are paddling around you. And then maybe into, kind of what are the requirements? How has surfing evolved now? And what do you need to be able to do that maybe, you didn't have to, back in, back kind of when you were coming up?
Sure. I want to back up a little bit because we got to, I would say, a place in my career, early 30s, and I was in top shape. I was feeling really good. I was dedicated. But one of the greatest things I learned was the Kelee meditation. And the reason that it kind of changed me and made me more of an open person to things, and made me look inside myself a lot more, which I wasn't doing. I was only looking to the second point. So if I'm the primary point, everything else would be a second point, right? There's only one primary point. It's you. I've looked at all the nutrition. I was eating right. I was taking all my vitamins. I was training like a madman. But then it became, I had some issues to deal with. And the way I would deal with them back then was by trying harder. And I realized that like the more energy that I put out there and outside of myself, I was putting none of it inside myself, looking within. So I started doing the Kelee practice in probably 2000 in May. And I started looking inside going, wow, like there's a lot of stuff in here that I need to unravel. Like that's blocking me getting a lot more trophies, right? My performance was like, there's something controlling this meat suit. This meat suit is being directed by someone and something, right? Your thought patterns, your beliefs. And I had to start looking inside and realizing there's a lot of stuff in there that wasn't me, that was directing me. And I wanted to remove that stuff to get just to a truer place in myself where I was living a more truer life for me. And so I want to just throw that in there as it being a very impactful part of my career, is having that change and doing that practice for, like 25 years now. But that has led to a greater understanding of also my body. It's like I used to think about my body and I used to think about what would change it. I needed to start listening more to like how I felt about it, So
great point.
Training, and everyone told me this is the best training in the world, and I would go, God, I'm really sore after this, and it doesn't feel good when I go surfing. I'm so sore, but everyone kept telling me this is the best training, so I needed to feel things out and stop listening to others, but listening more to myself, and that's a really important part that every young kid has to take with a grain of salt what they're hearing and just to ask themselves, how does this work for me? Because,
Wow.
that's
huge. And I've certainly experienced that when people will come to me and they're like, and you look at their film and stuff and they've got all this skill set. It's unbelievable when they free surf. But when they get into contests, they're kind of not even an issue there. So that ability to understand what's going inside your own self becomes a wonderful tool to help to sculpt and mold to your goals. Because, I mean, there's a lot of kids out there right now that have tremendous skills, and maybe some of them are the best surfers in the world, but they're not the best competitive surfers. And they're two different types of people. I think, you've got the ones that are really good surfers and great competitors, and the ones that are just superior surfers, they can't do anything in a contest. Have you seen that happen often?
Yeah. I think I was one of them.
Yeah.
I was as Kelee would say, you were a much better surfer than competitor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a real thing. And I think that it's probably in almost all sports. But it's a big deal, getting out of your own head and allowing yourself to do the things that you've worked so hard to do shouldn't be as hard as it seems to be for many, many athletes.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's just as important to gain more knowledge and gain more wisdom. And it's also very important to let go of what isn't you that you may have been told was you your whole life.
Yeah, that's great. And understanding that a loss is not really a loss unless you lose the lesson behind that loss, right? Because that was kind of Kobe's deal too, is like, I can say I don't go out to win every time. What I can say is I go out to learn every time. And so, sometimes he didn't love the loss. Nobody loves the loss, but he was able to extrapolate so much out of the loss that it made it worth him losing that one match to gain something that may carry him through many, many more in the future. And I think that that's something that I pass on to the athletes that I work with from, the GOAT, the basketball GOAT anyways, let alone some of the things we've both learned from our GOAT, from Kelee, because his mental game was so strong.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say, there is no loss, you win or you learn. And Kobe would always say, look, the wins were great, but tomorrow I'm going to get up the same and I'm going to go work. And the losses suck, but still tomorrow I'm going to get up the same and I'm going to go work. And the idea is just to continue to build on that, over the years and not be, fixated on the outcome. But that takes a level of meditation, introspection, mental prep, like you're talking about, Taylor. And, at the end, we're going to try to go back real quick and just talk about, what now that you wish that you would have known, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then also, what you tell kids now as far as, what they should really be focused on. But knowing that you were potentially one of those athletes who was just a real creative, amazing artist, in the water and on a surfboard, but then had challenges in a competitive, space. What do you know, now with your years of meditation too, and being able to really dig through that? What would you tell someone, like Tim mentioned, a lot of the kids that he works with who have the similar challenges, in addition to Kelee, in addition to meditation and getting some perspective on the fact that, look, this loss isn't the end of the world. Like, this gets you that much closer if you are willing to endure it and learn from it to where you want to be. How do they deal with that? And what are a few tips that you could give them to kind of navigate that?
Well, the first one would be easy on yourself. I do not believe that you can be hard on yourself and negative with yourself and expect gains. If you want to improve and if you want to evolve fast as you can, it's like Tim said, it's about learning. It's about going, okay, that didn't work out the way I thought, or I had a great game plan. And you know what? Sometimes a guy gets lucky and he just gets the bomb of the day and there's nothing you can do about it. You can get out and even though you surfed great, you did everything, you didn't really do anything wrong. You got to get out of the water and just tip your hat and just go, okay, that guy got me that time. And you know what? Good for him. And be humble with, like, there's a lot of great surfers out there, and you can get beat by a guy with half your talent. You've got to respect everyone, as it took them a lot of work to get to that place too. You got mutual respect. You got to be easy on yourself. You've got to be open to try different things. One size does not fit all. You can't be a follower. And I think the last thing I would say is that you need to learn to trust yourself. Because if you don't trust yourself, you need to find out why. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different coaches over the years in my life and trainers, and I love that Aussie term of, like, just pick the eyes out of it. And that's what I went and did. I went and worked with some of the greats, and I went, okay, from Griga, I like that, and that. From Ben Ipa, I like that, and I used that. And from, I had all these Ian Cairns as a coach. I had Mike Lambrisi coaching me. I've had, like, so many different coaches, and I just go, he did that right. I like the way he did that. So everyone needs to build their own formula, because not two people are going to be the same. There's 8 billion people on this planet. Every one of them is different. Your formula could have a lot of crossover with your friend, but there's going to be a couple different things, because no one's identical. And you've got to be able to be like, hey, you know what? I really feel like I need yoga, but my friend does weight training, so I'm going to do weight training. No, man, you got to just break off and do yoga. You got to do what you got to trust your gut feeling. And I think I second guessed myself a lot. I had so much going on up here where I was second guessing myself in heats. I trust myself so much more than I did. I wish I could go back in time, but
yeah. Well, that's great wisdom. Great wisdom, man. And wisdom you can't read out of a book. Wisdom comes from the experience and the hurt and the love and the passion and the dirt and all the things that come with life. And so thank you for sharing that. And I'm hoping there's some young ones that are listening to this podcast that can grab a couple of those pearls because they're hard earned.
Yeah, that's great. And so, you mentioned training methods. Once again, thank you for the amazing hat. Tim and I, Tim spoke, but I was honored to come down. You and Mike Rintala, who's a legend and was on the podcast a few months ago, put on an amazing event down at Viore called the Surf Masterclass, and was tremendous. And you had Kelee meditation there as well, and we're just a really great event. And so thank you. And once again, the most comfortable hat in my arsenal.
Thanks, John.
But maybe you could just real briefly before we wrap it up, kind of talk about the work that you've done with Mike and DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, how that's helped you as an athlete and as a surfer and as a human. And then we'll kind of get into, I think we got some great nuggets, and obviously wish that this could be a 4-hour conversation because we haven't even begun to kind of, unpack your career and all of the amazing moments and then your transition into your life, kind of right now and your recent hip challenges and the amazing surfing that you're doing right now. And I'm sure how much fun it's got to be back out in the water. But can you talk a little bit about how you met Mike and how that's progressed?
One thing is he's still a professional surfer, man. The dude gets paid to get in the water. So we got to give him propers at a young, spry 53 years old, I believe, my
50,
friend.
54.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, I was trying to youth you up a little bit, but yeah, it's incredible. How many professional surfers at 54 are there out there?
Yeah, it's been the last several years. You question whether you want to go through rehab again and again and again. I had 3 knee surgeries and a partial knee replacement, and then the hip thing started happening, and needed a hip replacement. Went through that in December. So yeah, there's been times where I'm like, God, do I still want to do this? I just don't know. But you know what? It's so exciting for me. It's like nobody knows, right? Like no one is come back from a hip surgery, I don't think, and has surfed like me at 54 years old. And I'm just like, hey, if I can get the next 52-year-old guy to like put down the beer for a couple of weeks, focus on training, get himself right, go in there, get his surgery done so he can run around with his kid again. Cool. That's great. I'm good with that. I don't even need to meet the person. I just know that how many times I get hit up from people going, how do I get through this? And then of course, if I don't know, I'll call Mike or I'll call Tim or I'll introduce them. I feel like I'm a good networker where I bring people to them that I know that they'll mutually like, like Matt
cool.
Grove, for example.
Right.
So for me, I'm also, I feel like an inspiration for the older crowd, maybe, but just show you that like 13 pieces of metal in my body, you can still go out and do a cutback, and a pretty good one.
A really good one.
Inspiring. So inspiring. And so, as we kind of wrap this up, we've got, really important to be a willing and involved and active participant in the process, whether it's, so that you don't get injured or throughout the rehab process, and just trusting the fact that you will get through it. And there's better days to come. And if you're just consistent and persistent, that you'll get there. Being curious and being a student of the game, as far as just your willingness and eagerness to seek knowledge and to continue to grow and evolve. The importance of mental prep and meditation to really get some perspective and some clarity on what you may be challenged with. Trust yourself, which that's got to be the toughest one out of all of them to earn that, to earn anyone's trust, much less your own trust.
I mean, let's face it, man. It's not easy being a human.
Amen. Well said.
Yeah, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
24/7.
You got what's going on out here, and then you got what's going on in here, like there's all this needs to work together in harmony. And that's why I look in and outward for health.
Yeah. And I know Tim would say, in order for this to work, and for your brain to be able to communicate and coordinate with your muscles, you've got to improve soft tissue quality. I'm sure it's a lot of the benefits that you got over the years of working with Tim, the tissue work to improve, that tissue that's turning from beef jerky or turning from filet into beef jerky, really, really hard to connect to that. And then the benefits of once you've improved that tissue quality through the tissue work and found those areas where you're having challenges and dysfunction, utilizing, something like DNS, through Mike to then help to connect the brain to those tissues so that now you can get them to react and respond. Anything else that you want to leave everyone with as far as, once again, we want to do a much longer version of this where we can really just kind of wrap and spend some time and hopefully maybe bring Mike into the conversation. But what are you really, what are some of the top, kind of key tips that you're trying to impart to not only, like you said, younger surfers, but the older guy that you're trying to just say, hey, put the beer down for a month, see how good that you feel, make activity and movement and life and feeling great your new beer. What are a few things you kind of want to leave everyone with?
I would just say I've learned a lot from DNS. I would say that DNS is not just for, I would highly recommend athletes in their 20s to look into this. There's stuff, this stuff is awesome. It's about moving around your joints like you did as a child. And because you were so flexible and strong when you were 2, when you get off the floor, you get cross-legged, it didn't even matter. But you got to be strong in these positions. And that's where DNS came in for me. I did yoga for many years and I got really flexible. But then Tim showed me, like, you're really flexible, but you're also not very strong in that range. So I was like, I need to add the strength in with the range. And that's why I find DNS to have the perfect balance of that. And one of the other great things about what they teach is that inner abdominal pressure. And I use that. I try to use that no matter what exercise I'm doing, or even if I'm paddling back out after a wave, or I just try to keep that engaged because, like I said, I have that fusion and then there's a vertebrae above it. It's got a lot of miles on the wheels. I got to keep space in there. I got to keep that whole thing strong. Otherwise, the thing I love the most is surfing. I'm not going to, really be able to do. And that bums me out when I can't do that.
Yeah, Tay, one of those things too, I just want to tell the people that are listening out there is that movement and that strengthening that you're getting along with the range of motion, what I see when that happens is you're creating more fluid exchange. Out with the old, in with the new. You're nourishing those dried out tissues. And I'm telling you, anybody that's, 40, 50 years old knows what a dried out tissue feels like. It feels terrible. It feels like someone's stealing your youth from you. And for me, that's the analogy, is that you're losing fluid in those areas. So anything that we can do, any activity that we can do to help reestablish not only hydrating by drinking plenty of fluids, but by getting those fluids into those areas that haven't moved enough, that are overused and understretched, are the things that really bring the youth back to those that think that they've lost it.
And let's be clear, that's not just 40, 30, 40. We had a girl who flew in from Florida who's 12 that we worked on yesterday, and she had, tight, dry, overused tissue. We've got kids, 10-year-old pitchers, who have shoulder, elbow, issues, and we get in there and that tissue, it's just overuse and it's shortening. And when that shortens, you can't get the good stuff in or the bad stuff out. And when you stop using it, it tightens and dries up even more. And so that can happen to all of us. Taylor, you talk about the challenges of just being a human being. Being on the phone, driving, all of the postures and movements which help to create and condition that shortness. really progresses over time. And it's a key, essential, kind of component to not only keeping from getting injured, but performing and allowing your brain to connect and being dynamic and performing at a really high level. Once again, if you want to learn more from Taylor and Tim, we've got the SPRT Surf Movement Masterclass coming up in Newport, August 1st and 2nd during the US Open. Dr. Warren Kramer, who's the co-medical director of the WSL, will be there. Pat O'Connell, who's now the president of Florence Marine and a surfer on tour for a lot of years, will be there. I think Brad Gerlach is going to join us, Tim, potentially. Eric Goodman from Foundation Training. Mike Rentala is going to be there talking about DNS and practical applications for.
And Rafael
from Gymnastica Naturelle. Eric Goodman from Foundation Training. I believe Dr. Masi Reynolds, another orthopedic surgeon, is going to be talking about PRP, stem cell, peptides, biologics to help improve and enhance healing. There's a whole list. Jason Amstutz, who works with the 49ers and worked with Tiger Woods. There's a whole list. Go to SPRTtherapy.com and look for the Surf Movement Masterclass. Once again, Taylor, thank you so much for your time, for all that you do. We appreciate you. We're looking forward to August and also to doing this again at some point and really being able to just kind of freestyle and riff, and just let it flow.
We know how to let it flow, Tim.
Can do.
Thanks so much, gents. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This is the SPRT Therapy Podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks, John.
Be well, stand tall. Thanks, Taylor. Woo!
Yeah, Timmy.
Thanks again for joining us for today's SPRT Therapy Podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes in coming weeks. And please check us out on Instagram and online at sprttherapy.com for upcoming events and discounts on live educational courses. Until next time, have a great day and stand tall.